Today we're going to learn how to rack, bottle, and pasteurize mead or cider in a safe way. Now, the main point of pasteurization and of this video in general is so that you can have a bottle that is carbonated and is not 100% dry. If you wanted to have it 100% dry with some carbonation, you could just put the right amount of sugar in and cap it and leave it as it is. If you wanted to have it be not carbonated with some sweetness, there are other ways to do that as well. But if you want it to have sweetness and be carbonated and be bottled, there's always the risk that it will continue to ferment and explode. And that is why this process is really helpful. You can have a lot of bottles that are waiting and safe. Some of the important tools we'll need is a racking cane, a hydrometer, a siphon tube, and this one has a plastic clip so that we can stop the flow. And of course you'll need all your bottles ready and sanitized along with the tools that we already showed. Everything should be sanitized. After you think your fermentation has finished, you don't see any more bubbling in your airlock, you'll want to open it up and drop in the hydrometer to make sure that it is at 1.0 specific gravity. This lets you know that the fermentation is finished and all the sugars have been fully fermented. Before you plan to rack it, you want to put it in position up high on a table is where I put it, and let it sit there for a day so that a lot of the floating particles can settle. Especially if you want it to have extra clarity, you want to give it the time so that all of that can clear out. Then when you're going to rack it, I do want to put it at an angle so that the racking cane can get down deeper into the liquid as it starts to drain out. Here you see that I have attached the siphon tube to the racking cane and put the other end into the receiving bucket and started to pump it out. And then you'll see that the liquid is slowly leaving the fermentation bucket and going into the receiving bucket. The racking cane is designed to leave the yeast cake that's at the bottom of the bucket undisturbed and to try to get the most of the liquid out. As that liquid gets out, you'll get to see what's left behind. Moving the liquid a lot clearly disturbs the yeast at the bottom and makes it very cloudy. You don't want to mix this in with what you're going to bottle. In order to carbonate, you'll need to add in new sugar that the yeasts can ferment and create air bubbles. I like to use apple juice concentrate because the sugars are pretty well dissolved already, but you can also use table sugar or honey that's been warmed and dissolved well and mixed well. Of course, it's best if it's fully thawed and there are no frozen bits left like you see here. Nevertheless, the sugar that's been added has a pretty immediate effect in causing the hydrometer to raise, and you can see that the specific gravity has increased. And so once you've determined how much sweetness you want, you can add in a little bit of your sweetener at a time, but it's good to take a record so that next time you do it, it's less of a trial and error, and you know more precisely how much you'll need to add. Here you can see the hydrometer shows approximately 1.005 specific gravity. Most of that sugar will remain as sweetness in the final drink, and some of it will be used by the yeast to ferment and create the carbonation that we want. If we bottle in glass to start with, we will never know how much pressure has been building in it, and we won't know when we need to actually do the pasteurizing. So I always start with a plastic bottle, as you see here, and that really allows me to gauge how much pressure has been building and when is the proper time to pasteurize. If you just guess, it's very possible that the glass bottles will burst from the pressure of the carbonation, or you could pasteurize when they're not fully carbonated, neither of which are things that we want to happen. I do not fill this bottle all of the way. I want to leave air in the top. When I put the lid on, I want to squeeze that air out so that the bottle is very loose, and that there's room for that pressure to build. So make sure you don't fill it to the top and squeeze that air out when you're tightening the cap. When bottling, it's important to watch closely how quickly they're filling. It's easy to overfill it and then spill, especially if the glass is dark. Some of it's very dark and it makes it very hard to see how much it's actually being filled. Be careful not to fill it to the top of the bottle. That can result in broken bottles when pasteurizing. I fill up to just above the shoulders of the bottle at the bottom of the neck. Here's an example of me overfilling a bottle. Here you can see a lot of bottles that have been filled and approximately what the liquid level is. I estimate about 10 bottles per gallon will be able to be filled. Make sure to label the bottles and the test bottle in the same way, especially if you have multiple different types of alcohol going at the same time, so you don't confuse your test gauge of pressure with which bottles need to be pasteurized. I've checked this bottle just about every day to see when it's tight, and once it's as tight as a commercial bottle of Coca-Cola or a little bit more, you'll notice that it's ready. At the bottom of this one, you can see some of the dead yeast that's fallen, and that's just a result of bottle carving. I do not pasteurize the test bottle, but put it in the fridge instead, because I don't want to raise the temperature too much on plastic. But putting it in the fridge will keep it from exploding. For pasteurizing, I like to use a sous vide, and you'll need some vessel, some bucket that is as tall as the beer bottles. This device has a maximum water level, and I am able to raise the device so that the maximum level is above the bucket. When filling the vessel, I like to start with hot water so that the machine doesn't have to work as hard at the beginning. And then as I fill the bucket, I put in the bottles until the bucket is full of the bottles and the water is about as high as it will go. We don't want to overfill the bucket or try to force the bottles in. Some space is good. It's important that the water level is higher than the highest alcohol level in the bottles, because there is some possibility that liquid that is above the hot water level could contain yeast that would stay alive through this process. So we want to make sure that all of the alcohol is below the water level in the vessel. The method that I use is 140 degrees for 10 minutes. Now, once you set the sous vide for 140, it will take quite a while for it to actually reach 140 degrees. You'll start your timer after it reaches 140. This timer is just to show you how long it takes to get there. It is possible to pasteurize on the stove top. However, controlling the temperature is much more difficult, and you could have adverse effects on the flavor of the alcohol or just be unsure if you really did complete the process. It took 26 minutes for my sous vide to make it to 140 degrees, but yours may be different depending on the model or how much water there is or how many bottles you're pasteurizing. Once it reaches 140 degrees, the next step is to set a timer for 10 minutes, and that's how long we want the bottles to be at that temperature to make sure that they have killed all of the yeast. And pointed out where. Remember to turn off the machine because the water level will go down, which can damage the machine. if it's still running. Bottles are also very hot, so find something to protect your hand as you lift them out. While the water is still hot, I immediately put in new bottles so that we can reduce the amount of time that it takes to come back up to 140 degrees. Remember not to force a bottle in if it's not going to fit. You do want to have some space in there so that the water can touch all the bottles. Adding the bottles does take the temperature down from where it was, so you should expect the numbers to go down even after you've turned the machine on. But it will should reach 140 degrees faster than it did originally. I'm checking here to see that the water level is higher than the level of the alcohol in the bottles. And I notice that there is some space in the vessel to add more water. Of course, adding hot water would be best, but it doesn't really matter. After you're done pasteurizing and remove the bottles, it will take the bottles a little while to cool, after which you could put them in the fridge, or you can just leave them stored somewhere, especially if you have a lot of them. And that's the great thing about doing pasteurizing is that they are stable. They will not continue to ferment or burst, and they are ready for when you need them. Thanks for watching. If you think you have some ideas that could improve my process, please write them in the comments below or ask any questions that come to mind.